So I know we're going to get into some big, large questions, and we're going to do what we've done, but we haven't sat down and talked to each other. We haven't even sat down and looked at each other for a long time.
Right.
So the basic question I'm going to ask, the starting question is, what have you been doing? How have you been?
Oh man, how would I answer that question? I've really been doing well. I think probably two major things I'd say. I love my time at College.
Right.
I love my time at AUC. I've been teaching also. I do undergrad classes at Morehouse every fall, generally. And I really loved shaping Black minds in that sense, encountering Black brilliance. That has been just the joy of my lifetime. If I could do anything again, I'd come back to the AU Center again.
Yeah.
That's I'm not making much money, but but in exchange for the time with these just immeasurably brilliant Black students, it has absolutely been worth it.
Yeah.
That is absolutely.
Yeah, in the midst of teaching those students, I can only imagine, what it feels like. Intellectually, have you ever felt lonely?
Occasionally, but not because of students, but because of the way in which the AU Center is not good about breeding intellectual exchange among faculty.
That's what I meant.
Yeah, that has left something to be desired at times. But other times, it's been really great. I've had amazing colleagues over the years and amazing exchanges. But these are four schools that have such individual identity, right? Which of course because you're a graduate boss. And most of them want it that way.
Right.
And his administrations and alumni want to keep it that way.
Mm-hmm.
So creating an intellectual exchange among the scholars in the AU Center, I think it has, and I think it will continue to be a challenging issue. But for the most part, finding good intellectual exchange, I have been able to find that. And then sometimes we're not, specifically in the AU Center in Atlanta, I can always get it.
Okay.
Right. Then we just cross the street, and so Jericho Brownson and I are very close, and I know such great folks, and so that's been great. I think that the only thing is I just wish the schools were endowed to really be able to support intellectual growth and matter among scholars in the way it should be done. There have been research I've wanted to do over the years that I've written proposals for to NEAs, places that has been difficult to pull off. What I'm in the middle of is just really hell to pull it off when you're just doing it on your own. And in 30 years I've had one sabbatical.
Oh,
yeah.
But I was asking the question not so much to get a description of your work environment, although I understand how meaningful and important it is for you to have taught it at Clark for 30 years. But it's actually a question, because you and I are really close.
Absolutely.
To ask a question of how you do it.
Oh, just me personally.
Yeah. So trying to figure out what have I missed over these 20 years? How you do it? What could you tell me about what this journey? Because I've been reading you, but it's very different when we were young men.
Very different.
So
I think I would say a couple of things. I think I've evolved tremendously. There are ways I've evolved out of the church. I was always really church-centered.
You would stop the car on the highway to get out and start shouting.
Now, let me be clear.
You still stopping the car and get out?
I'm far more Holy Ghost enraptured, spirit. I'm far more in spirit. I'm just less into the church.
Okay.
Right. So that distinction is clear in my head now, where it was not, 30 years ago. But I'm a churchgoer. I'm still a churchgoer. I don't miss a Sunday. But the reason is different now. I don't go to church because I need salvation. In fact, would you right? I think that's foolishness. I go because I need ritual. Right. And I go because I discover African people need ritual. When Black people do ritual, we are sound. When we do ritual, we are kinder. When we do ritual, we can see more clearly. When we miss ritual, and what I mean by ritual is spaces where we come together with spirit. Right. When we miss ritual, we're bad off. You know, and I never really thought about this until a couple of years ago. One of the reasons I think the civil rights movement worked for us as Black people is because it happened in our ritual space called church. Not the theology, not the Bible, not that, but the fact that as we're doing this movement, we are also ritualizing constantly, right? I think it meant everything in terms of the success of the civil rights movement.
Yeah.
If ritual stays at the center of our being, of our movement, anything we do is going to work.
So what was at the heart of the shit? I mean, you know, there's this kind of distinction that one could make, right? There's a distinction that one can make, but you can see it in William James's The Varieties, right? I'm not interested in doctrine. I'm interested in experience. So, and you know, there's a sense in which churches, since you play piano for your grandma. So what happened in Daniel Black's life that led to you making that distinction? It's not dogma, it's not theology, it's doctrine. It's a spirit, it's ritual.
Right.
It's all of which can be captured by the word spirit.
Sure.
Okay.
And I think it was my reading and my study of ancient African spiritual ways and ways of being, right, that really shifted me, and shifted me away from theology, but not away from God, right. So learning the precepts, learning the history of Ifa, learning Vodun, learning the spiritual practices of the Minje, learning the spiritual practices of the Akan, and all this pre-colonial, right? Just really, really, really reshaped my notion of how I understood spirit, how I understood God. Because what was messing me up, Dr. Glaude?
No, you about to get
Okay.
about to cuss on here.
Well, what was messing me up, Eddie, is I could not figure out why all of these people, Black and white, were going to church, but we couldn't get righteousness out of America, right? Like it wasn't adding up to me. It just wasn't adding up to me that folks were going to the same book, right, and going to these houses of worship,
right,
and still shooting people who look like me in the streets. I said something's wrong here. This is not working. Something's missing here. But I know spirit intimately, so that was never my problem. That was never my issue. My issue was like theologically, like what's the thing? And so for years and years and years, I studied African spirituality, African spiritual systems, and the things it taught was so mind-boggling and so knowing in my spirit that it freed me. It really, really, really freed me. Even things like the concept of into, which one finds in Jan's book Muntu, right? This notion that many African communities understood that when you're talking about spirit, you're not just talking about this invisibility in human beings. Spirit is in anything that's living possesses into, right? But what's really, really, really profound is that rings true with the way my grandmother and others raised me, but they weren't teaching it directly to me. It was just in our cultural kind of understanding. For example, one time I was maybe 4 or 5 years old, and I saw a baby bird that had fallen either out of a nest. There was this kind of really ugly looking gray little thing was moving on the ground, and I said, "Grandma, I think that bird, this little baby bird fell out of the nest." And she said, "Well, you got to put it back in there." And I was like, "I'm not touching that thing." And she said, "You got to put it back in there." You got to help it out.
Mm-hmm.
Right. And she was so adamant that we could not leave this little bird on the ground. Right. And she literally made me scoop up this bird and get up in this tree and put it back in this nest. Right. And that was so profound to me that she was as committed to this bird, it seemed to be, as she was to me. Because this life, like, you cannot leave life unattended. That any life that needs or seeking your help or seeking transformation, if you see it, it's your job to do it. Right. And there were so many, examples of this. And there are times when, we play spring crop. And sometimes my father and I, we stand, and these sprouts were just the prettiest green, they about that tall. And we'd look across the field, and Daddy would say, "You see God?" And I was like, where's God? Yeah. No, I don't, actually. Right. And he said, I want you to come out here every day until you see God. Right. And eventually I did. Right. And so, but there was this notion that God is bigger, right? Than just what the human eye can see. Yeah. But that is a wider epistemological notion of God than what the Bible was teaching. Right. And so in some ways, I don't want to sound arrogant, but in some ways I feel like I evolved past the Bible. Right. And it was a little frightening in some ways. But never past God.